A clear autumn night hangs over the northern plains. Friday night football lights glow beneath the cold skies. Farmers are driving home on dark county roads. Downtown Fargo is settling into silence. And above it all, a World War II fighter pilot is about to engage in what he will later describe as a dogfight with something he can't explain. Not another plane. Not weather. Not a trick of light, something that maneuvered faster than his fighter aircraft, climbed impossibly high, and seemed to anticipate every move that he made. Tonight on Midwest Shadow Files, we investigate one of America's earliest and strangest UFO encounters, the Gorman Dog Fight. Hello and welcome back to Midwest Shadow Files. I am Dan, your host, and your Midwest Files storyteller. This podcast, we explore the unexplained legends, haunted history, strange encounters hidden across America's heartland. And tonight, we head into the skies over Fargo, North Dakota. The year is 1948. World War II ended only 3 years earlier, and America is entering the Cold War. The atomic age has begun, and something else is happening across the country. People are reporting strange objects in the sky. The modern UFO era had essentially exploded into public consciousness in 1947 after pilot Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 crescent-shaped objects flying near Mount Rainier. Newspapers coined a new term from that story: flying saucers. Suddenly, reports were everywhere. Pilots, military personnel, police officers, ordinary citizens, and the United States Air Force quietly began taking these reports seriously. One of the most famous cases would emerge less than a year later in North Dakota. Lieutenant George F. Gorman was not some random witness. He was 25 years old, a decorated World War II fighter pilot, and a member of the North Dakota Air National Guard. By all accounts, he was experienced, disciplined, and highly familiar with aerial maneuvers. On the evening of October 1st, Gorman had been participating in a cross-country training flight with other National Guard pilots. He was flying an F-51 Mustang, the redesignated version of the legendary P-51 fighter from World War II. It was fast, it was powerful, and deadly. The kind of aircraft designed for combat against enemy fighters over Europe. And around 8:30 p.m., the flight returned toward Fargo's Hector Airport. Most of the pilots landed, but Gorman did not. The skies were clear. Visibility was excellent, so he decided to stay airborne a little bit longer to log additional night flying time. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He circled over the city. He passed a brightly lit football stadium where a game was underway below, and then, around 9 p.m., he noticed a light. At first, Gorman assumed it was another aircraft, but something immediately bothered him. He could see the Piper Cub aircraft flying nearby, its shape and wings clearly visible against the night sky. This new object was different. There was no visible fuselage, no wings, no blinking navigation lights, just a bright, white orb. Gorman radioed the control tower. Were there any other aircraft in the area? The answer came back. No. Only Gorman's fighter and the Piper Cub were known to be in the sky. But here's where things become important. Other people saw it too. The Piper Cub pilot and passenger both reported seeing the strange light. The control tower operators also observed it through binoculars. So whatever was out there, it wasn't just in Gorman's imagination. At this point, Gorman decided to intercept the object, and that's when the dogfight began. He pushed the Mustang toward the light. The object responded immediately. According to Gorman, it suddenly accelerated and began making sharp maneuvers unlike anything he had ever seen. And at one point, the object appeared to make a direct head-on pass towards his aircraft. Think about that for just a second. A military pilot in a high-performance fighter plane believed an unknown object was intentionally approaching his head-on in the dark sky over Fargo, and Gorman later says the object would break away at the last second. sometimes within only a few hundred feet. He climbed. The object climbed higher. He dove at full power. The object outmaneuvered him again. Chase continued for nearly half an hour, 27 minutes according to official records, and during one turn, Gorman pushed his aircraft so hard he temporarily blacked out from the G-force. When he regained control, the object was still there. It was still moving, still playing what sounded very much like a game of aerial cat and mouse. Now imagine the psychology of this for just a moment. This wasn't a frightened civilian. This was a trained fighter pilot. And afterward, he gave sworn testimony stating he believed there was definite thought behind its maneuvers. That line became one of the most chilling details in UFO history because Gorman was not describing random movement. He believed he was interacting with an intelligent object. Eventually, the chase carried Gorman roughly 25 miles southwest of Fargo. At around 14,000 feet, he attempted another dive toward the object, and then the light suddenly climbed almost vertically and disappeared into the darkness. And the encounter was over. Gorman returned to the airport visibly shaken, and soon the military got involved. The incident triggered an Air Force investigation under Project Sign, one of the government's earliest UFO study programs, and initially, some investigators reportedly considered the case highly significant. Project Blue Book, and we'll get into a little bit of that here in a little bit, would eventually describe the Gorman Dog Fight as one of the classic UFO cases of 1948. Now that alone is remarkable because military investigators saw thousands of reports over the years. Most were dismissed quickly. This one, however, stayed with them. But eventually the Air Force settled on an explanation. So, what was Project Blue Book? To understand Blue Book, we need to go back to the late 1940s. The U.S. military was deeply uneasy about the sudden explosion of UFO sightings across America. Remember the timing here. The Cold War had just begun. The Soviet Union was becoming a major threat. And military officials feared that some UFO reports might actually involve advanced foreign aircraft, secret surveillance, or even psychological warfare. So in 1948, the U.S. Air Force created its first official UFO investigation program, Project Sign, and the Gorman Dog Fight quickly became one of its most famous cases. Project Sign investigators interviewed George Gorman extensively. They examined weather reports, flight data, and much, much more data. And according to later reports, some investigators privately believed at least certain UFO sightings could represent something extraordinary, possibly even extraterrestrial technology. One rumored internal document, known as the Estimate of the Situation, supposedly argued exactly that. But Air Force leadership rejected the conclusion. Officially, Project Sign continued. Unofficially, the tone began changing, and in 1949, Project Sign became Project Grudge. And Grudge is an important name because many researchers believe the new project's mission shifted from investigating sightings seriously to debunking them whenever possible. Witnesses were often dismissed. Psychological explanations became common. Cases were so quickly closed, but sightings kept coming. And eventually the Air Force realized the subject was not going to go away. So in 1952, Project Blue Book was born. Project Blue Book became the most famous government UFO investigation program in American history. Like I've mentioned before, it was headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Blue Book operated from 1952 until 1969. And over those 17 years, investigators collected more than, are you ready for this, more than 12,000 UFO reports across the U.S. Most were dismissed. Some were eventually explained, weather balloons, aircraft, optical illusions, hoaxes, but not all of them. Hundreds remain officially unidentified. And that detail matters because despite decades of public jokes about little green men, the Air Force itself admitted some cases could not be fully explained. Now speed up to today, that's big stuff because that's kind of where we're at. Right, well, these files being released that, hey, there is UFO data out there. We don't know what these were. And this is the military. They have all the information, they have all the data, and they can't explain it. Interesting enough, there were things discussed in the Gorman Dog Fight that they considered one of the strongest early UFO cases because of the pilot's credibility and the multiple witnesses involved. And the new term came to be unidentified flying object rather than flying saucers. UFO became the official terminology. According to Blue Book investigators, they were often caught between two worlds. On one side, military leadership demanding calm and conventional explanations. On the other side, however, pilots, radar operators, police officers, civilians on the ground, they could not explain it. And that tension followed Blue Book for the rest of its existence. Blue Book undeniably shaped America's relationship with UFOs for generations. It became part investigation, part mythology, and part Cold War paranoia. And by the late 1960s, public interest in UFOs had exploded. Books, television specials, newspaper headlines. The Air Force commissioned a scientific review known as the Condon Report through the University of Colorado. The final conclusion? Further UFO study was unlikely to produce significant scientific discoveries. And in 1969, Project Blue Book officially shut down. But here's the fascinating part. Even after Blue Book ended, the sightings never stopped, and decades later, the U.S. government would once again acknowledge investigating unidentified aerial phenomenon known as UAPs. So in a strange way, the questions raised by the George Gorman over Fargo in 1948 never truly disappeared. It just evolved. And that's why the Gorman Dog Fight remains so important today. Now, let's rewind the clock. Let's go back to what was going on at the time, the explanation that they thought maybe Gorman had encountered in the skies over Fargo. Like I was getting into with the story, the Air Force came back with the Gorman Dog Fight incident, and they settled on an explanation: a weather balloon. Specifically, a lighted weather balloon released earlier that evening. Investigators argued that Gorman became disoriented while chasing the balloon at night, and they suggested some of the apparent movements were illusions caused by his own fighter maneuvers. At one point, investigators even theorized he may have confused the planet Jupiter for the object after losing sight of the balloon. Case closed. At least officially. But critics immediately pointed out problems. A lot of problems. First, multiple witnesses observed that object in the sky. Second, experienced pilots generally know the difference between a planet and a maneuvering object. And third, Gorman described rapid directional changes and high-speed movement difficult to reconcile with the drifting balloon. And perhaps most importantly, why would a decorated fighter pilot push his aircraft to blackout conditions chasing a weather balloon? Even today, the case remains controversial. Skeptics argue the Air Force explanation is plausible under stressful nighttime conditions. Believers argue that the explanation doesn't even come close to matching the witness testimony. And somewhere in the middle, the mystery survives. There's also something unique with this Midwestern story. Unlike famous UFO incidents in remote deserts or secret military zones, this happened over Fargo, North Dakota, over football fields, neighborhoods, farmland. Ordinary people looked up, saw something strange moving across the night, and that part is what makes the Gorman Dog Fight endure nearly 80 years later. It feels grounded, local, real. And maybe that's why stories like this continue to resonate throughout the Midwest. Because out here, the sky feels enormous. And on a cold night, it's easy to imagine something watching from above. The Gorman incident helped shape future UFO investigations in America. So what really happened October 1st, 1948? Did Lieutenant George Gorman engage an experimental aircraft unknown to the public? Did he accidentally chase a weather balloon through the darkness? Or did something truly unexplained maneuver through the skies above North Dakota that night? We may never know. But for 27 minutes, a fighter pilot believed he was not alone in the sky. And nearly 80 years later, we're still talking about it. This is Midwest Shadow Files.